Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Today I'm talking with Melody. She's on Twitter as Scientist Mel, and Melody is obviously a scientist. She's also a science educator. She's got a couple of channels on YouTube where she sometimes takes your questions, talks about science. Hey Melody, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so if you could give a bit of your background and then we can go from there.
Sure. Now, my education background, I have a bachelor's in biology, bachelor's of science in biology, bachelor's of science in biochemistry. I have a master's of arts in teaching, specialized in secondary science education, and I also have a master's of science in analytical chemistry. I've helped develop a breast cancer test when I was in graduate school, working on my master's of science, it's warranted us a publication. So it's where we were able to detect exosomes. Those are teeny tiny little bubbles that cancer cells kind of release into your blood. We were able to detect those teeny tiny little things, which means that's a better test than the current gold standard to try to determine whether or not a person has a type of cancer and if it's trying to spread, because that's usually how certain aggressive strains of cancer spread. I also have done education research. I've taught in public schools and at university. So I absolutely love science. I do a lot of outreach stuff on my science communicator channels, youtube.com/scientistmel. I also have a website where I post all of my sources, and teachers can use the resources there I have as well. It's completely free for people to download and kind of dig in and learn a bit as well.
All right, cool. All right, your research, because there was a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about, and when you mentioned the cancer research, and obviously if you're doing breast cancer, you're going to be focusing on women, but I mean, and this might be just because, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not in the field, but, recently things have come out where when they're doing testing on animals, they're mainly doing it on male animals. And so they're developing, cures or treatments for people, but they're not testing, they're not testing on female animals. So like the effects that would have on testing, on results, like, do you see that? Or
That's a very good question. Just to give you kind of a bit of a background when it comes to testing, and particularly for medicines and treatments, animal models are a first step. They're not a final step before it goes to market. So when you're dealing with animals, you're trying to find out whether or not a particular medicine has an effect on the cells that you want it to have an effect on. Usually medicines interact with what we call protein receptors. They're like little antennas that stick on the outside of your cells. And I recently did an episode on hormones, which is kind of like a cell signaler. So I talked a little bit about that in that particular video. So if you want to kind of get more information about that, you can find it on my channel. But essentially, medicines often interact with those little antennas that are on the outside of those cells. And so the animal models let us know on whether or not the medicine has an effect on the cells that we want it to have an effect on. So is it just hitting the cancer? Is it hitting other things? Is it detecting just the cancer? Is it detecting other things? Now, what the sex of the animals, as far as the genetic sex of the animals, doesn't matter, because that's just the first step. Now, once they find that it has an effect, then they have to fill out all of this paperwork. They have to jump a lot of hoops for like the FDA in order to start human testing. And so once they move from that, they'll go, okay, well, we know that this is effective in the mouse models. We're going to try just a few people, and there'll be multiple sexes. And then they'll just try a little bit. And usually when you start like that exploratory type of human testing, that's like a last ditch effort to try to get treatment. But there's a lot of different hoops you have to jump in order to get to the point to just testing on people. And then once they get to the initial human trials, they'll have various versions of that particular medication that they found to be successful in the animal model. And then they'll move it on to which ones were effective in the human trials the most with the least amount of side effects. Then they'll move on to a larger scale. Usually the sex of the animal doesn't matter, because you can genetically engineer mice to just have whatever type of expression you want. So if you were working on like a diabetes medication, you could genetically engineer mice with and without insulin. You could just genetically engineer them to where they don't even have the gene for insulin. So you can see what it's like, in a mouse like that, or a mouse that has an overproduction of insulin. That's kind of why they use a lot of the mouse models, is being able to knock out highly specific traits and just see, does it work on what we want, yes or no. Okay. So if that makes more sense.
Yeah, okay, it does. I mean, like I said, it was just something I read about, and I just said, okay, it just seemed to me, if you want to treat the whole population, you'd want to be able to test it on a good sample of the whole population, right?
Right. That's why the larger scale human trials are done after they check for efficacy to make certain the drug does it once. And as an aside, breast cancer happens in men too, not just women.
Yeah, I realize that, but it's much smaller, isn't it? Or is it just smaller because it's less diagnosed? Because it does.
It's. I think it's smaller due to just breast, the amount of tissue there. But it still happens in men, so it's important for men, particularly if breast cancer runs in their family. Guys, check yourselves too. So.
Yeah, I guess. Next time I work on my pecs, which is never, because I never go to the gym, but
be like squeezing. I'm checking for lumps, guys. What, sir?
All right. While we're on the testing thing, because I just brought this up before we started, testing for falsifiability, to falsify your hypothesis or to verify it. Now, I mean, I know, if you say, okay, I'm going to take this match, I'm going to light it on fire, I'm going to hold it to this piece of paper, and the piece of paper is going to burn. Now, if you do all that and it doesn't happen, obviously it doesn't work. But, and again, this is, from layman's point of view, from everything I'd read, it was always, you want to try to falsify your hypothesis, so you want to try to disprove it in as many ways possible. And if you always get a null result trying to disprove it, then obviously there's some truth to it, right?
Yes. When you're going through the scientific method, so when we were going through developing our breast cancer test, we had to make certain that it was actually detecting the thing that we wanted it to detect. So we had to check to see if other things were detected by it or not. And so are these positive? So if you get really good results, you're like, yay, this worked. And, then you got to go, okay, why did it work? Now we've got to try it from this angle and verify that, that it is the thing that we're picking up and not something else. And if we think it's something else, we test that to say, okay, does this thing show up on our test? Yes or no? Okay, what else is in the blood that could possibly connect with this test? We pull that. Okay, did it show up? Yes or no? And so there's always trying to disprove your hypothesis while at the same time trying to prove your hypothesis. So you have to rule out every single possibility for you to have a positive signal on your test in order to show that that's what it is. Because when you undergo peer review, so after you've done all of your fantastic experiments and you're ready to publish it in a science journal, what will happen is they will take that data and they will ask all of the questions that hopefully you've already answered. How do you know it's not this thing that's gone off? How do you know it's not this thing that's gone off? How do you know it's not this thing over here that's interfered? And they will go through and check and any questions they have. Then they might want, okay, well, you didn't perform this experiment. You need to perform this experiment to verify that this is this thing and not this other thing that's recently come up. So yes, it's both disproving while proving it at the same time. So you can look at it either way, but you do have to rule out every single variable that could have an effect on a thing to make certain that these two things are connected.
Okay. You brought up peer review, because that's something that I think a lot of people mistake. Because I think when they hear peer review, they're like, okay, this is the gold standard now. This must be true. So, like, if you read, okay, this was a peer-reviewed article in a journal. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to pan out or anything like that. I mean, if you wanted to maybe just go a little bit into that, like what that...
Sure. Peer review is a gold standard, but it also depends on what journal it's in. So you have lots of journals that have very, very, very loose standards and aren't considered high-end by any means. So, I mean, and what I mean by high-end is high quality. You're not going to get quality science in them. There are journals that do homeopathy, which we know there's no evidence at all. There's journals. I was just talking about this on my show last Sunday for Deepak Chopra. He publishes a lot of sciencey sounding papers, and I do that show with Doc Savage, who is currently an immunologist who helped develop the HPV vaccine. He's really freaking smart. So we're sitting there ripping apart these journals, and we are these papers, and we're laughing our way through it because it's utterly bad science. But they're peer reviewed, and you're like, no, look up the journal. We never even heard of one journal. There's one journal that was the Scientific Research Publishing Incorporated. Sounds legit. I was like, sure, we've never heard of it, and we can't find it anywhere. But it's a paper that Deepak Chopra is proud of. So
yeah. Okay, I mean, like, peer review, from my understanding, and I mean, I could be completely off base here, is that, so let's say I was going to put something into the New England Journal of Medicine, right? I've got something out. So when they do the peer review, that's when they're going to challenge you on your methodology. And, if your methodology doesn't fit the standard practices or what's expected from that journal, the standards of that journal, then you're not going to make it in. But it doesn't mean that, so, if you've done one study and the study's followed all their rules, that doesn't mean that, okay, this is now the cure for cancer, right? It's a study that was done. So if someone sees peer review study in a journal, they might think, okay, we've got a cure for cancer. It's coming out tomorrow. Like, that's what I was trying to get at. Like, it doesn't mean that.
I mean, like, misrepresentation of it.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I mean,
that's the common thing in the media.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the peer review, because if you have a magazine or any public, not just, but anything that's got a peer review system, but if their methodology is completely flawed, it doesn't matter, how it's peer reviewed, because if the methodology is flawed, you're not guaranteed any good results, right?
Right. I mean, well, and the thing is technically what you hope to accomplish with peer review is that they've gone through the methodology, they've gone through and checked it out, they've looked at the data, they've asked questions. The notes that I got back on that paper were in a series of 2 separate emails, and it took me 10 scrolls to get through each one. So it was, I have a question here, I have a question here, but that's good peer review. You want all of those questions, because not only is that going to make your paper better, but it's also going to make you a better scientist. If you have a study that's been published in a not reputable journal, and it's got a sample size of 5 people, and they didn't have a blind study, the people knew they were taking this medicine, the doctors knew, and whatever, it's not a good study. And I talk about that actually on my channel. I talk about how to read a paper, how to tell if it's good science or bad science, what are your big red flags. But yeah, the media often misrepresents science, not because they're bad journalists. It's just a lot of them are not as scientifically literate as they need to be. They'll sit there and say, chocolate helps with heart disease, not if you eat 5 Hershey bars every day. but some of the compounds in cocoa are antioxidants, and that's good. Really high antioxidants, but if you mix it with a lot of milk, sugar, and wax, you get these giant fatty filled chocolate bars. You eat 5 of those every day, you're going to increase your risk for a whole lot of stuff.
Okay, ate my way into diabetes, so I can I can test to that.
But cocoa's good. I have I love chocolate, but I don't. I'm trying not to eat chocolate bars, but I'll get me some strawberries, fresh strawberries, dust it with a little Splenda, put some cocoa powder on the top, shake it up, and then I add some fat-free whipped cream, and I will eat that like a toddler. Well, it's really good.
Okay, I mean, like I just mentioned, I ate my, and I'm fully serious here. I did eat my way into diabetes, but that's like on the weekends, I'll buy dark chocolate. You can get those big bars. You can get like 8 or 9, like 8 to 10 squares of them, and I'll have one of those squares like, each night on the weekend. And that's I don't eat that during the week or anything like that. But it's at least the dark chocolate's not that sweet. Doesn't have that much sugar.
Right.
But
No. I mean, and that's the thing. Just about pretty much anything will kill you on this planet. It's a matter of dosage.
Yeah. Drink enough water. Okay, I mean, because you spend a lot of time trying to educate, and that was one of the things I wanted to speak to you about. Because I did some science, but this was back in the late 80s. So, I mean, there was even less women in, the science departments. And, you keep hearing about that now, and you keep hearing about, needing to get more women in STEM. Now the whole saying, like, needing to get more women in STEM, I'm like, okay, needing to get more people who want to go into STEM. I'd rather look at it that way. But, let's encourage everyone who wants to get into it, and let's encourage everyone who shows an aptitude for it to at least try it. And that's, like, okay, I'll give you a reason why I say that. Like, I don't like affirmative action. I don't want to get a job because I'm brown. I don't want to get a promotion because I'm brown, right? I want to get it because of the merit. Yes, let's invite everyone to apply. Let's make sure everyone's able to apply. So when I see that, like, we need to get more women to go into science, it's like, no, you need to encourage more women to make it viable. You need to make it more open to get in. And I was just wondering if I could have your thoughts on that. Like, or am I coming at it the complete wrong way?
Oh, no. I mean, everybody, I think it's important for everybody to kind of have an open discussion on their thoughts about these things, because the more minds we have thinking about it, the more likely we are to have, find a solution. And that's kind of my thoughts on the STEM fields. We need diversity, not just because, it's not fair that there's not more women in there, particularly women of color. It's not fair that that's going on. But one of the things that I like to point out is, what if we had been inclusive from the beginning? What if we had all of the Katherine Johnsons, all the Hidden Figures ladies completely involved at the very beginning when we started the science, when we started to organize the scientific process? How much further would we be in society? Because it's not about man, woman, race, whatever. Yeah. It's about how many minds can we have thinking on this. And the more different perspectives that we have in life working on a problem, the more likely we are to solve it. Now, trying to solve this issue of lack of diversity in STEM, that's a monster of an issue. Then this is coming from an educator as well as a scientist, and I have worked in industry. I worked in protein recombination, trying to basically make the parts that go into a test to find out if you have a particular virus. So I worked in a bit of that. And what I see is we have it's a multifaceted issue. It's not just affirmative action. It'd be nice if we didn't need that, but we have a lot of poverty. We have a lot of inner city schools that don't have the programs that they need. We know poverty has an effect on brain development. We also know that nutrition is a big issue. And schools that are underperforming in this country don't get money so much from the No Child Left Behind. You have to show that your teachers are educating kids. But these kids also sometimes are at home by themselves raising their brother and sister. They don't have dinner. Their only meal is at lunch. And the school lunches are not all fantastic in every district. That may be their only meal of the day, getting breakfast and lunch at school. And then you also have issues that are societal issues. We have racism. You also have issues at home with parents. And so you have to kind of consider society plays a heavy role in the future of people in STEM. So what we have to do is we can't retroactively do this now.
Yeah.
But what we have to do is address all of these problems that we have within our school system in order to get more people in. And one of the things is a lot of companies like the Gates Foundation, they donate money to districts to try to build and their STEM programs there. Disney, I don't know if you heard about this. When Black Panther came out in Memphis, Tennessee, that was the highest. That was the city that had the most people go see Black Panther was in Memphis, and so the Disney donated money to that Memphis City schools to try to develop a STEM program because of the huge turnout for that. So you do have companies that are trying to do what they can to funnel some money into these school districts, but until we address a lot of these other societal issues, that's going to always be playing a role. Now, what we can do now, until that's all fixed, is to incorporate people who are gatekeepers, that are women of color, men of color, white women, whatever, and have them in mentor roles in various parts of universities and high schools to say, okay, and encourage that, because we have people who have different life circumstances. They need to be able to see somebody that's similar to them that can address their individual needs. Does that make sense? Because they're going to be different.
Oh, yeah, no, okay. I don't disagree with anything you've really said there. Like, it's just, but like I said, I don't, like in Canada, a couple of years ago, they said that all the chairs of all the departments of the universities, if they're not diverse according to the population statistics, universities will lose money. I didn't live in the Middle East, but I mean, I studied that region a bit because I'm an ex-Muslim, and the enforced secularism that you had in the Middle East was not a good thing. It gave secularism a bad name. Like, this enforcing it, like, okay, if you want a chair for a chemistry department right now, you're going to go out, you're going to look at the best candidates available for that chair, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you say, again, you want the best people in there, you want them, and I realize, but just saying, okay, we're only going to look for this group and this group only, I think that's a disservice to yourself and to your university. I agree with a lot of the things you were saying. And I realize, like, right now, someone graduating high school right now with all those conditions is going to have a huge hurdle to cross. And let's say, instead of pushing them into a university course, and they might not do as well, okay, you know what? We want you in this course. We think you're good for it. But take a year at a community college, prep for it, and then go into university. Something along those lines. And I mean, obviously, yes. And I've said the same thing you have. Until you fix what's going on before you get to the university level, you're always going to have this problem. Like, those things need to be addressed before you do anything else.
And the thing is, they're not really completely going to go away, but we need to lessen their impact. My suggestion, you're going to have chairs of departments and that sort of thing. That's important, but what would be useful is to have somebody there within the department whose sole role is to mentor women, somebody in the department whose sole role is to mentor, people of color or women of color, because they're all going, because just the way that the state of the world is right now, particularly our society, you and I have vastly different life experiences. Oh, okay. Now that's not saying that my life is worse than yours or your life is worse than mine. I'm not even going there. But I recognize that my life is going to be very different than yours. And so what we bring to the table is going to be very different. Now, me walking into a room that's nothing but a bunch of men, having been a survivor of assault, yeah. I'm going to have a different feel than, but see, those things are still going to be there, but making certain you have a mentor in place, somebody you can talk to, because that's vastly lacking, particularly in graduate studies. There's really no mental health and things available to help you cope, because you get torn down. You get torn down and rebuilt in grad school. It's just like freaking Army for science, but it's rough, and what a woman and a man goes through are completely different. And you got men who are making like sex jokes off in the corner, and you're like, okay, what am I going to do? Report them? Then I get blacklisted, or I get like a target put on my back as a troublemaker. You see, so that's a thing it's rampant.
Okay,
so
I'll come back to that in a second. Okay, that mentor thing, I think that's a great idea. Yes, mm-hmm. You need, like I said, I've been through university and stuff, and I know how hard it can be, especially if especially if you're young, you've gone off to a new town, you don't know anyone there, it's all that plays on you. Plus, then, like you said, I mean, I did some science in school, and I know what you're talking about. You have, and okay, maybe it's changed because like I said, I graduated university in '92, so it's quite a while now. But people who are in the sciences were still, like your typical geek from what you would think of a geek in the 80s, right? But because they were doing well in their classes, they had some sort of credibility or something, so they started acting like what you would think an alpha male would act like. And it was just like, but it was, they were insecure in themselves, and they just acted like complete assholes, and you don't need that.
No, you don't.
No one needs that. But it's, and I know where you're coming from, because I would see that, and it's just like, give it a rest. And I mean, like, that was one thing I always found. Like, there was, if a woman did better than one of these guys on a test or something, they would get so pissed off. Like, okay, I would laugh. I was one of those people who went from, like, I could fit in any group. Like, I was not like one of those people in high school who was, okay, you're the jock, you're this, you're that.
Right.
So I was all over the place, and but I did really well in science. I liked science, and I was in those classes, and I'd see them, and I'm like, if we were out in a bar, you couldn't even talk to her.
Right.
But you feel powerful in here, so you're taking it out on her because you did crappy on a test. Like, like it was just like that mentality. I mean, no matter where I saw it, like if it was in like that kind of setting or anywhere else, you feel powerful for whatever reason, and you're really insecure, and you're taking it out on someone else. I mean, like, that kind of thing is a thing I think needs more focus on. And that's like, if it's not a welcoming environment, you're not going to get more people to come in.
No, I agree. That's one reason why women are leaving computer science. Women are responsible primarily for computer science to a degree. Ada Lovelace had the first. She actually early on came up with the first stuff. I mean, and we had women are solely responsible for programming all the computers at NASA. We have women, and they're like, well, women just don't like computer science. No, they actually built the thing. But they're leaving computer science. There's a whole lot of studies about this. They're getting degrees, but they're walking away from their jobs. After they get a degree, they walk away from their jobs, and it's largely due to a hostile work environment.
Yeah, I mean, okay, and I hate having to say these things, and it just, we're not talking about every single person here. We're talking there's a group of people, and I work in IT. I've worked in IT in war zones. I've worked in the military and stuff like that. And the military was the only place I didn't really find that. Okay, everyone took the piss at everyone. It didn't matter, and I mean, we had no filters. Like, there was nothing was off the table.
Well, that's also part of your bonding.
Yeah, and I mean, but that was one of the most equal places I've seen in a workplace. It's if you do your job, you're respected. If you don't, you're not, and nothing else really matters. And
I mean, I know, and part of that bonding is like a brother sister type of thing, where you just like, hey, punch them on, like, what are you doing? You being whatever. It's just part of that. I've had family in the military. That's kind of how they described it, and they're like, it's just part of the bonding, because you're all in a very hard, difficult situation, so you take it out in your different ways, or you can kind of come together as a unit. But
like I said, there it was pure, do you do your job? This is your job. Do you do it? Do you do it well? Great. You're respected. Nothing else really mattered.
Yeah.
And I've never seen that anywhere else. And I mean, you hear a lot about, the military, they're sexist and this, that, but because I'll see a bunch of guys sitting around telling jokes, and but if you're in the middle of a war zone, that's what it is. And if it was girls in there as well, like there was one close protection team, and they gave themselves the name, the Barbie Team, and it was all women who were this close protection team. So those are like they'll be bodyguards for generals and VIPs and things like that. And that's what the nickname they gave themselves. And it's just like I said, they were respected by all the other close protection teams because they did their job.
It's a different culture.
Yeah.
It is a bit of a different culture. And no, you don't see that a lot of other places. But, I was going to read this letter to you. I don't know if you ever saw this. This was from James Malden, who's a senior in mechanical engineering. This was an open letter to, I think, the university thing. And it said, letters to the editor. So there might be hope. This letter might bring a bit of hope, but kind of puts things in perspective, particularly what we're talking about. And he says, to the women in my engineering classes, while it is my intention in every other interaction I share with you to treat you as my peer, let me deviate from that to say that you and I are in fact unequal. Sure, we are in the same school program, and you are quite possibly getting the same GPA as I, but does that make us equal? I did not, for example, grow up in a world that discouraged me from focusing on hard science, nor did I live in a society that told me not to get dirty or said I was bossy for exhibiting leadership skills. In grade school, I never had to fear being rejected by my peers because of my interests. I was not bombarded by images and slogans telling me that my true worth is in how I look and that I should abstain from certain activities because I might be thought too masculine. I was not overlooked by teachers who assumed that the reason I did not understand a tough math or science concept was, after all, because of my gender. I have had no difficulty whatsoever with a boys' club mentality, and I will not face added scrutiny or remarks of my being the diversity hire. When I experience success, the assumption of others will be that I earned it, so you and I cannot be equal. I tear up a bit because I printed this out and put it at my desk every day when I was in grad school. So you and I cannot be equal. You have already conquered far more to be in this field than I will ever face.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like my perspective on that, not just being a woman, but also other marginalized groups who are told they can't. I was told science is hard and you're a girl, you should be a teacher in 2000 and I believe it was 2011 by a professor of biology at the university.
Good Lord.
So, he's a gatekeeper. He was in charge of who got into grad school there. So I had to go to the chemistry department instead and get a master's there because I'm a woman.
But no, I mean,
but
okay.
What am I going to say? No,
but okay. You see, like that's not right. I'm sorry.
No, it's not.
There's no other way I could say it.
But what was I going to do? File a complaint?
but that okay. See, like, and I'm not saying anything. I'm not trying to be, like, but like you said, like, what are you going to do? File a complaint? Like, that should not have to be your attitude. If there's someone like that, taking recourse against them should not be seen as a bad thing.
But it is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. See, like again, maybe okay. Like I mentioned to you earlier, I got out of the sciences because of I just had bad experiences with the teachers. Just and it wasn't anything like that. It was just they were like telling me like it was their way of the highway, and only giving me one option of how to do something. I'm like, well, that doesn't work. That's not what but and I guess obviously being a guy, I don't think I'd ever encounter that. But like I was, and I don't want to diminish any of that, but just one little thing in that letter, again, it was going back to the affirmative action. Like, I understand why it was there. I understand why it's needed and all that. But like I said, I don't want to, and this is myself personally, and if others, feel differently, that's fine. Like, I don't want to get a job, oh, you had things put in your way, so we're going to give you a job because you're brown, or we're going to give you that promotion because you're brown.
I don't even think it's that anymore, because there's highly qualified people, and it's not about, because of the fact there's so many qualified people now who are people of color, or a woman or whatever, that are fully capable of having that job, but there's still active studies right now where you have people people who work in hiring, and you can look up this study. I'll send you a link to it when I find it. They took people who are in charge of hiring others, bringing in new talent, gave them resumes, equal resumes, put a man's name on one, a woman's name on the other, gave all of these people, even switched the names around, completely equal. The people who were hiring rated the males' resumes higher every single time. Every single time.
Okay, and I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying that there's not people who aren't qualified, who aren't getting in. Like things like this, like that kind of stuff has to stop. I'm just talking about,
it sucks that we have it. Yes, I agree.
And also because one of the problems I see with it is, let's say I get hired because I'm a diversity hire, right? And I don't do well in my first month or whatever, the first 6 months or something. And people are like, oh, well, he only got hired because he's brown and so he doesn't know how to do the job. Like it just, the people who are already racist, it gives them added ammunition. And, like I said, I get where you're coming from and I understand why it's needed. It's just like, I wish it didn't have to be needed, and I wish there was another way around it.
I agree with you. It absolutely sucks, and yes, that can be seen as a thing. But the way I see it, and what I've actively done, is I've made myself so ridiculously overqualified for most jobs that when I do get a job, they're like, "Oh, well, she's like, I have 4 degrees. How many do you have?" And then I just like, it took me 4 degrees. Yes, it did. But I how many do you have? We're not going to talk that way. So I've had to, and they're like, well, you shouldn't have they say you shouldn't have a thin skin on the internet. No, I point out horrible behavior as a teachable moment. That's largely what I do when I'm pointing out things. But it's like, I worked really, really hard to make myself so incredibly qualified for lots of different things. So if I walk in, well, you're overqualified for this job, that's okay. I'm completely fine with doing that. And that's the only downside, is because I'm usually more qualified than my boss. So, which is the downside to that. But
I've been in that position.
But I try to just go with the flow. But that would be my response to that. Like, you know what, I'm here, I'm doing this job, I have this many degrees, and I'm working hard. What are you doing? It's just, we have to kind of shift this idea that, it's a constant work in progress, isn't it? It's a constant work in progress.
But like I said, it's when I said I don't like affirmative action. I'm not saying get rid of it or anything like that, but
Yeah.
are my personal takes on it. And
Yeah. It sucks.
oh yeah,
Everything is, but in my opinion, everything is ammunition
yeah.
when it comes to racism and sexism. It really doesn't matter what it is. They're going to find a reason to make it horrible.
I know they are. I know they are, but I'm just like, I don't want to give them any kind of easy ammunition, right? It's just, okay, I'm going to completely switch gears here because your biology and chemistry background, and it's just because, this is a lot of stuff I read. Proton gradients, chemiosmosis. Like, because I'd read, I saw a couple of things about it, then I started reading some stuff by Peter Mitchell, and I couldn't really get that, and then I read this book by Nick Lane called The Vital Question, The Energy of Life, and it's talking about all the proton gradients and how, like, it's the, it's basically like how it generates the energy for the cells.
Okay, are you talking about electron transfer?
Well, yeah, proton transfers, yeah.
Okay, because... Okay, so you're talking about like the sodium potassium pump where you have the different potential energy across across a nerve cell.
Well, no, it was
the electrochemical gradient. Is that what you mean?
Okay, it's called chemiosmotic coupling, I think.
Okay. Well, if you're talking about the electrochemical gradient, what happens in a cell, now what they mean by protons, that means usually just an element that has a positive charge.
Yeah.
And it can be in the form of hydrogen ions. You have the sodium-potassium pump where you have sodium ions and potassium ions. And so what they do is they create an electrical potential. So whenever you have a thought, you have the charge switch from positive on one side, negative on the other way around. That carries the charge across like your nerve cells into like the other parts of your body for like muscle movement and stuff like that. So if that's what you mean by the proton gradient, and electrical.
Because the book by Nick Lane, and it was based on like they'd seen that in the hydrothermic vents at the bottom of the ocean. And they were going to run some experiments in London where they were going to recreate that in a lab to see if that was what gave the spark to create life. So if that was...
Okay, like the sulfur vents where you have like the extremophiles with the bacteria that live there.
Yeah, and then so like, because basically what they were seeing there was the hydrogen, like hydrogen nuclei just going through that chain at the bottom of those like whatever... like the thermal vents there in the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's where they think a lot of the origins may have happened, because they believe that was a similar condition at the beginning, where you had the early beginnings of unicellular life in the form of bacteria. If you go through, we see anaerobic respiration is the first because of a low oxygen environment, and then it converts to aerobic once we started getting photosynthesis and stuff. But the early Earth, they believe was similar to like those geothermal vents that are underwater, mostly sulfur. Not some place that you would think would be a fun place to live, but But it also gives us insight onto what could live on other planets as well, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, maybe we'll see something like that on Europa. Never know.
Maybe. Wouldn't that be neat? I suspect Titan might have life because of all of the different hydrocarbon type of things that are like the sea of methane and all of that. It's very possible that there'll be similar constructions of something like what we see with proteins with amino acids over there, just in using different...
Yeah, okay, so it would be something similar to like what's down, but I mean obviously you're talking like microbial life, you're not talking
Oh yeah. I wouldn't expect little people walking around on Titan. It would... Unicellular is probably the best way to go, or maybe like little water bears, tardigrades. Those little boogers can live in all kinds of places. They will outlive us. So.
Yeah. Okay. Speculation here, just because we're talking about that. Now, would you suspect they'd have a similar structure like DNA, or would it be like? I mean, we'd have to play off those assumptions, right? I mean, yes, you'd have to be ready for anything, but if we're going to go looking for it, we've got an N of 1, and we're going to look for things that are in that N of 1, right?
Well, you would expect there to be something similar. A book you might enjoy is Touchstone of Life by Lowenstein. Okay. It's a pretty cool book. It's not too heavy of a read. It does get into some mathy parts, but I enjoyed it. I had to read it for my physical chemistry class, and it talks a lot about information theory, but on a biological sense, in the fact that when we look at DNA, how is it that our universe is falling to bits? Because it is. Entropy is increasing, and it's going to continue to increase. But yet we're still able to have some kind of organization in the form of us and DNA, and it's consistently adapting and still storing this information. Well, he gets into a lot of how energy is spent making this DNA, and it's kind of like what you do with computers. It's a similar idea. You are expending energy and keeping it in the form of by building information. And so it's similar in the biological sense. So we have these reactions that they're undergoing to form our own little code of sorts, but it codes for proteins. What stuff that works sticks around, stuff that doesn't work, they keep putting it together. So it would make sense that there would be some kind, in order to have an organized set of proteins, which is essentially what we are, we have to have instructions for that. So the proteins that work in that environment have to have a consistent code to use over and over again in order to continuously make them. And so they would have to have some kind of genetic code. It might start out in the form of RNA, and they get more complicated and start to connect and say, okay, now we're going to form these more complex structures, and then we start protecting it to keep it from mutating. So you do have conserved portions of your DNA that will not change.
Okay. Since we're talking about DNA, the Chinese CRISPR babies.
I haven't read about the CRISPR babies.
There was a bunch of articles earlier this year. They'd taken, I don't know if I guess they took the embryos and they were working on them, and they were trying to take out certain genes, but then they think they made them smarter. And the guy who did it was coming under a lot of fire, and then they were talking about doing another round of testing using CRISPR.
Okay, ethics.
Yeah.
Okay, so the ethics involved with CRISPR is when you start messing around with people's DNA, one gene doesn't do just one thing. Usually one gene is in charge of lots of different things. And the other issues with CRISPR, we talked about dosage earlier. Now we're able to use CRISPR in small animals and small things, and because we can just use a little bit of that enzyme, and it's a bit easier to control. When you get into children and grown people, the dosages change, and the more of that enzyme you introduce, and the more of the CRISPR components that you introduce, the more likely you are to have things go completely and utterly wrong. One of the things is, what if it latches on, and if you're familiar with CRISPR, what it does, it goes through, it latches on a part of the DNA, and it swaps out for the correct nucleotides, and it kind of fixes it that way. But if it latches onto a gene that looks similar to the problem one, then you're changing the wrong gene, which has all kinds of issues. There's certain toxicity associated with that enzyme, to where I believe it's Cas9. If it starts, they don't know it happens completely when it breaks down at certain dosages, what it does to people. It can also cause cells, it can start becoming uncontrollable and change other parts of the DNA. So there's still a lot of issues with that. Now, you'd mentioned that they were working on embryos. Those are still small enough to where the dosage could be a controllable amount, to where they could just tweak what they wanted. But they're going to have to watch that because, again, one gene doesn't do just one thing. And then you could run into a lot of ethical issues. Yeah, we fixed this one particular genetic disease, but now we have this new problem that's shown up because by changing this here, we now have this other thing. So it's just, it's it's still in early days with CRISPR.
You know, fixing diabetes, but then making someone totally dependent on sugar.
Yeah, he's overproduction of insulin. They eat candy every day. I don't know. That may not be too bad. After a while, all you think my teeth would rot out.
Yeah, I was going to say dentists would like that, but yeah. But
I'm here for my weekly teeth cleaning, dentist.
But yeah, no, I mean I get it. Like there's, you know, obviously you don't want to impede research because it could lead to something good, right? But at the same time, you want to be able to do it with a little bit of care and a little bit of, you know, like I said, wisdom. Like you want to be able to, you know, do we want to like create a baby with 4 legs so they can run faster, right? You know, like
yeah,
you know, it's just not that I think anyone would want to do that, but you never know.
Well, I mean, yeah, and then you got to think about that one cautionary tale I used to play when I was teaching biology is the film Gattaca. If you've not seen it, it's amazing. They get into the ability to where they're able to make nearly genetically perfect people. And so you introduce a brand new level of discrimination, what they call the invalids versus the valids.
Yeah,
you know?
Okay, but Gattaca, I kind of liked it in its original form, Brave New World.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's pretty interesting, but you know, him having to borrow somebody else's DNA in order to get in a space program because, you have a chance of developing a heart issue. Just because you have the gene doesn't mean it'll happen to you, but they throw that out the window. You know?
But I mean, like, I don't know if have you read the Huxley book, Brave New World?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's Aldous Huxley, it came out in the 30s, I want to say, but it was basically that. So society was alphas, betas, and all the way down to the deltas, I think, or they might have had omegas. I can't remember. It's been a long while. But then there's people who live outside the cities, and they call them savages, and they bring one of these guys back into the city, and it's just if you're an alpha, you have certain levels, and you have the best genetics, and everyone is, you know, if you've been born as an omega or a delta or whatever it was, you're going to be a worker, you're going to be this. And it was a very organized society. It was all done by how your genetics go. So like I said, Gattaca reminded me a lot of that because it borrowed a lot off of Brave New World. They did a movie in the 70s, but it was 70s sci-fi, so if you like a little cheese in camp, you'd probably like it. But the book was really good.
I loved Gattaca. You know, the face babies versus the lab babies. But it's just it just, I don't know. Anytime you have that, it just is a reminder that people trying to oppress other people is never going to go away.
No, it's not.
It's you know, how do we just limit that impact?
Yeah, I mean, you know, but then again, okay, let's just stick with the CRISPR type of stuff. If you can find how you can curb that impulse, you might then also curb any kind of other aggressive impulse, which, I mean, even the urge to explore and want to, you know, advance your field, like, you know, if it's science, like, if you don't have a little bit of aggression, you know, to do the research, you might curb that as well, right? You might curb that.
Well, I mean, there's science to show that when we see fluffy things, we get, like, aggressive and want to hug it. I mean, so is our hugging going to go away, too? You know, it's like, it's so fluffy, I'm going to die. That's a real thing. You get, like, really super aggressive when you see it. And it's not like angry aggressive. It's like, I must cuddle this within an inch of its life. I mean, there's science on this. So it's when you just start messing with stuff, you're gonna have a trade-off, you know. I won't need to wear glasses anymore because now I have like perfect vision. But then, you know, I mean, it's just, if you see the film Gattaca, they're like, we can't have glasses, have to have contacts, but you can't do that. We have to completely fix your vision, but you can't have scars. So it's just like, that's one of those telltale signs. So they wipe that out quickly. So, you know.
No. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you very much. If you have anything else you want to talk about, plug your channels, and please send me the links. I'll put them in the description.
Awesome. Yes. So every Saturday morning at 10 a.m., I have the Science of, which is a topic that is viewer chosen. And then I have a poll, and then they pick, and then I kind of put it in that order. So every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Central, I hop on and I discuss a topic. Last Saturday it was hormones. I've talked about nuclear energy. I think I'm talking about sharks one weekend. It's all a myriad of things. So that's fun. That's like a really good educational, and we even get into harder science. We're getting into a bit more of the harder science now that I have a producer. I have somebody who runs the show for me. So all I have to do is worry about content, which makes it so much easier. And then on Sundays, I have a show called Oral Audacity. And that's a comedy show. It's a comedy, cheeky show. And my counterpart, Doc Savage, swears a lot. He swears a whole lot. He's Scottish. And if I tried to put a dam on that, that would be like damming the ocean. I can't do it. I'm not even going to try. I adore Doc. He works in immunology, has worked in industry science for about 25 years. Lots of publications. I'm really excited to have him on the show. This Sunday we're going to talk about David Avocado Wolf.
Oh, good Lord.
We just take the horribleness and we just gloriously rip it apart.
That name. Oh, man.
I can't stand him. He has me blocked on Twitter. Deepak Chopra hasn't blocked me yet. But Deepak, we ripped his science papers just to shreds. And we did it in the funniest way possible. I'm still laughing. I'm still laughing from Sunday. So this Sunday, we have little challenges on the show. Is it real or nah? Essentially, and I have like a little animated character that pops up and pitches a pseudoscience idea to Doc, and he has to guess if it's an actual product or not. So that's fun. So there's that. That's every Sunday at 3 p.m. Central. Occasionally I'll have a show on Thursday nights, I believe around 6 Central, called This Week in BS, where I take like a latest idea that's come out. Like I've talked about anti-vaxxers and Facebook pages associated with them, what they're doing. I had Doc on the show then because he works in vaccines. I've had a vaccination lawyer come on who wrote the book on vaccination law. I did a talk on the abortion bans with Dr. Leah Torres, who is an OBGYN, also Nate Brody, who's a law professor. And so we had a sex educator and an activist on the show as well. It was a great panel. So that's a bit more serious, but BS is in bad science. So it's that, and then every once in a while I'll do a show called Spirited Science. And if you're interested in being on the show, let me know. That's like my adult outreach. So if somebody's like, I want to be on your show, I'm like, great. We'll make an alcoholic beverage. What scientist do you want to talk about? And like, I want to talk about, I don't know, Marie Curie. Fantastic. And then I come up with a little recipe for a Marie Curie drink. And then we sit around and I give the person whatever information they need to read up on, and then we just have a chat about Marie Curie.
Okay, just out of curiosity, if you're going to make your Marie Curie drink, you would have to make it glow in the dark.
You can make it. That's where we might get into layers and maybe drop a little dry ice on the top. Like super like cool looking,
Yeah.
But it's just a fun, laid back show. So that way I can get people who, and it's most times people who aren't scientists. They're just like, I really like science, and this is my favorite science communicator, my favorite topic, or my favorite scientist. And we just sit around and we enjoy an adult beverage. Drinking is not required. You don't have to drink. And then we just talk about that. And it's just a lot of fun. So those are the different shows that I have. And then I make shortened versions of my Science of shows. So that's called Science to Smell Shorts. And then I have a website where I put all my stuff, and I have merchandise. scientistsmell.com/shop. You can buy stuff there if you like to sport sciencey couture.
Oh, cool. Like I said, send me all your links. I'll put them on the bottom. And thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you for having me.